Work construction inspection. Have for 19 years. I drive out to job sites across Georgia and the Carolinas, sometimes as far west as Birmingham, and I'm gone most of the month. 3 weeks on, maybe 5 days home, then back out again. That's just the job. I knew what I was signing up for when I took the regional supervisor position back in 2018, and the pay made the lifestyle easier to accept. What I didn't sign up for was coming home to find someone else's coffee maker on my kitchen counter. Let me back up. My name is Hal. I'm 51. I bought my house in Smyrna, that's a suburb just northwest of Atlanta, about 6 years ago, after my divorce was finalized. It's a 3-bedroom ranch on a quiet street with a 2-car garage and a decent backyard. Nothing fancy. I bought it with cash from the settlement and a small loan, and I paid it off in 4 years because when you're gone 3 weeks out of every month, you're not exactly spending money on entertainment. I live alone. I have a daughter who's in college up in Knoxville, and we talk on weekends when she's not buried in coursework. Other than her, there's nobody. No girlfriend, no roommates, no dog. Just me in the house, and most of the time, it's just the house. I used to joke about it. 1,900 square feet of real estate I barely use. My co-worker Frank would shake his head every time I brought it up. You're paying taxes and upkeep on a storage unit, he'd say. He wasn't entirely wrong, but it was mine. I'd earned it. And every time I pulled into that driveway after 2 or 3 weeks on the road, there was something genuinely good about walking into a space that was exactly how I'd left it. Quiet. Mine. Safe. That feeling lasted right up until the spring of last year. I'd been in Greenville for 11 days inspecting a commercial build that had fallen behind schedule. Long days, bad coffee, the usual. I was sitting in my truck in the hotel parking lot, eating a gas station sandwich at 9:30 at night, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my next-door neighbor. His name is Dennis. We've been friendly since I moved in. I water his tomatoes when he travels. He takes in my mail, that kind of arrangement. He's retired, keeps odd hours, notices things. The text said, "Hey Hal, don't want to alarm you, but there's been a lot of activity at your place the past few weekends. Trucks, cars, people I don't recognize. Figured you'd want to know. Give me a call when you get a chance." I sat there with the sandwich in my hand and read it twice. My first thought was someone had broken in and was using the house. My second thought was that maybe Dennis was mistaken. Maybe he'd seen a utility crew or someone doing yard work for the wrong address. My third thought was that I hadn't arranged for any yard work. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. He told me that for the past 4 or 5 weekends, maybe longer, he said, but those were the ones he'd noticed. There were vehicles parked in my driveway and sometimes along the curb in front of my house. A white cargo van, sometimes a pickup truck, different cars throughout the day, people coming and going. At one point, he counted 6 or 7 people in the backyard. He thought maybe I was having the house renovated and just hadn't mentioned it, but it kept happening. And the crews never looked like contractors to him. No logos on the trucks, dressed too casually. And the activity was always on weekends, never during the week. "I figured if you hired someone you would have told me," he said. I hadn't hired anyone. I told him I'd look into it and thanked him. Then I sat in that parking lot for another 20 minutes, trying to figure out what was happening to my house while I was 11 hours away. I had one camera. I'd installed it about 2 years earlier, pointed at the front door. It was a basic unit, nothing sophisticated, and I'd stopped checking it regularly because nothing ever happened and the notifications got annoying. I opened the app on my phone. The footage went back 30 days. I started scrolling. What I found took about an hour to get through, and by the end of it, I had a very specific, very unsettling picture of what had been happening at my property. Every Saturday, sometimes Sunday as well, starting around 8 or 8:30 in the morning, a white cargo van would pull up to my house. A man would get out, unlock my front door with a key. My key, the key that opened my deadbolt, and go inside. Within an hour, more cars would arrive. People would go in through the front door or around to the side gate into the backyard. In the afternoon, they'd leave. The van would be the last to go, usually by 6 or 7 in the evening. This had been happening for at least the past month. Probably longer, given what Dennis told me. Someone had a key to my house. Someone had been letting strangers in every weekend for weeks, and I had no idea who. I drove home the next morning, left Greenville at 5 a.m., stopped once for gas, pulled into my driveway a little after 10. I sat in the truck for a while before going in. I don't know what I was expecting. I knew nobody was there. It was a Tuesday, but there was something wrong about walking into a house I suddenly wasn't sure was still mine in any real sense. I went in through the front door with my key. Everything looks normal at first glance. Living room furniture in place, nothing obviously disturbed. Then I started looking closer. In the kitchen, a coffee maker on the counter that I did not own. It was a commercial-style unit, the kind you'd see in a catering setup or a small office, not the type you buy for a home kitchen. It was plugged in. There was a paper cup left next to it, lipstick on the rim. In the garage, this is where it got strange. I have a 2-car garage and I only use one side. The other side I use for storage boxes from the move, holiday decorations, my daughter's old furniture from when she went to college. That side had been reorganized. The boxes had been pushed to the walls and stacked more tightly, creating a large open space in the center. There were 2 long folding tables, not mine, set up in that space. Folding chairs, 8 of them, leaning against the wall. Extension cords running from the outlet along the baseboard. In the backyard, the patio furniture had been rearranged to face a central area. There was a portable canopy frame, still set up, anchored into the lawn. I stood in the backyard for a long time. Someone hadn't just been entering my house, they had been setting it up, staging it. Using the garage and the yard as an event space. Every weekend, regular as a business schedule, they had been running something, a gathering, a pop-up, a catered event, I couldn't tell exactly, and they had been doing it in my house, with my utilities, on my property, without my knowledge or permission. The coffee maker, the folding tables, the canopy, the paper cups, Dennis's description of the cargo van and the 6 or 7 people in the backyard. Someone was running events out of my house, and they had done it so smoothly, so consistently, that they had been at it for weeks before I even found out. The first call I made was to the Smyrna Police Department. An officer came out that afternoon. He was polite, thorough, walked through the house with me and took notes. But by the end of the conversation, I could already see where it was going. "You said the locks weren't forced?" he asked. "No. Whoever got in used a key. And you don't know how they obtained a key?" "No." He explained it to me patiently, and I could tell he'd had this conversation before. Because the locks hadn't been forced. Because there was no obvious sign of traditional breaking and entering. Because the person had a key, prosecuting a trespassing or criminal entry charge would be difficult. Civil matter, potentially. Theft of services, possibly, if we could document the utility usage. But walking in with a key and using a space, legally that's a murkier situation than it sounds. "Change the locks tonight," he said. "That's the first thing. And if they show up again, call us immediately while they're on the property." I didn't change the locks that night. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. But here's the thing. If I changed the locks before I had any idea who was doing this, they'd just disappear. No way to identify them. No documentation of what they'd been doing. The only leverage I had was that they didn't know I knew. If I played this right, I could get a lot more than just stopping it. What I needed was to know who had a key to my house. I spent the next 2 days thinking through every person who'd ever had access to my property. In 6 years, the list was short. The previous owners had handed over all keys at closing. 2 sets, I'd verified them. My daughter had a key. She was in Knoxville and had been for 3 years. My ex-wife had returned her copy when we sold the marital home. She didn't even know I'd bought this place. I'd had a plumber in about 18 months ago for a burst pipe under the kitchen sink. That was a 2-day job because he had to order a part, and I'd left him a key to come back and finish. A locksmith had serviced the deadbolt about 2 years ago. That was it. That was the entire list of people who'd ever had proximity to my keys. The plumber. I hadn't thought about him since the job was done. He was a one-man operation, no storefront. Found him through a neighborhood Facebook group recommendation. I'd paid him cash. He'd asked for cash, said it was cheaper that way, and at the time that seemed normal enough. I looked back through my phone and found the text thread. His name was Calvin. I didn't contact him, not yet. Instead, I went to the hardware store and bought 3 new cameras. I installed them myself that evening. One covering the front door and driveway, one in the garage covering both the door to the house and the side door, and one in the backyard covering the gate and the patio, motion activated, with a local storage card as backup to the cloud. I did not change the locks. Then I drove back to Greenville and finished my job. That Friday night I flew home instead of driving because I wanted to be in the house before the weekend. I parked at the MARTA station and took a rideshare to my street, then walked the last 2 blocks and came in through the back. I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the kitchen with my phone and the camera feeds and I waited. Saturday morning, 6:53 a.m., the white cargo van appeared on the front camera feed. A man got out of the driver's side. He was somewhere in his 40s, medium build, dark jacket. He went to my front door, produced a key, unlocked it, and walked in. I let him. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and I let him walk through the front of the house and into the garage without saying anything. I watched on my phone as he moved through the garage, unfolding those tables that I now recognized as his, setting out the chairs. He made 2 trips out to the van, extension cords, a box of paper cups, a bag of supplies I couldn't fully see. By 9:30, 3 more cars had arrived. 4 people total, including him. They were setting up in the garage and the backyard. Through the camera I could see they were arranging food, catering trays, warming equipment, the kind of setup you'd use for a small event. At 9:47, I walked out of the kitchen and into the garage. The man in the dark jacket, Calvin, turned around and stared at me like I had appeared out of a wall. Nobody said anything for about 4 seconds. "This is my house," I said. "I need you to tell me what you're doing here." What came out over the next 45 minutes was this. Calvin had been running a small unlicensed catering operation for about 8 months. He had no commercial kitchen, no licensed venue. He had identified my house as an opportunity sometime after the plumbing job. He knew my schedule, or had figured it out, because I'd mentioned being on the road constantly when I'd given him the key to finish the job. He'd had a copy made. Every weekend I was gone. He and his crew would come in, use the garage and the backyard as a prep and staging area, load up the van, and go cater private events. Sometimes they'd use the house as the venue itself, the backyard canopy for outdoor gatherings. He had been charging clients, collecting cash, and using my utilities, my water, my electricity, my gas, to run a business for 8 months. He had 11 bookings still on his calendar. I had called the police before I walked into the garage. They arrived 12 minutes later. Calvin was charged with criminal trespass, theft of services, and operating an unlicensed food service business. The last one added when the officer learned about the catering operation and made a second call. His equipment was documented and removed from my property. The 2 other people with him were identified and released. They appeared to be workers who genuinely hadn't known the situation was what it was. The civil case took longer. My attorney sent a demand letter based on 8 months of documented weekend occupancy, utility costs, and here's where it got concrete. My electric bill had been running about $210 higher per month than my average. My water bill, $85 higher. Over 8 months, that was nearly $200 to $400 in utilities alone, not counting wear on the property. We also had grounds for unjust enrichment, given that he profited from a venue he had no right to use. We settled out of court. I'm not going to say the number, but it covered the utilities, the attorney fees, and then some. The DA's office told me he ultimately pled to a reduced charge and paid a fine. No jail time, which frustrated me, but they said it was consistent with what they could prove at trial. His catering business, obviously, was done. After the settlement, I had a locksmith come out and re-key every lock in the house. New deadbolts, new door hardware, the works. I added a smart lock on the front door that requires a code I change every time I leave for a job. The 3 cameras are still up. I added a 4th on the side gate. Dennis came over the week after everything was resolved, and I told him the whole story over a beer on the back porch. He shook his head the entire time. "I should have said something sooner," he kept saying. I told him he said something when it counted. My daughter called after I told her about it. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Dad, you sat in the dark kitchen and waited for him? Why didn't you just change the locks?" I told her the same thing I'll tell you, because I wanted more than for it to stop. I wanted to know who had done it, and I wanted something to show for it. Changing the locks would have ended the problem, but it wouldn't have answered any questions, and it wouldn't have stopped him from doing it to someone else. I think about that plumber every time I hand a key to someone now. The pause I take before I do it. The moment where I ask myself whether I actually know this person, or whether I just know their name and their trade and the problem they showed up to fix. I still take the same job. I'm still gone most of the month. But I check the camera feed every morning now, same as checking my email. It takes 30 seconds. I know exactly what my driveway looks like at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. I know what my backyard looks like on a Sunday afternoon. It's a small thing, but it's mine. I keep coming back to that moment in the dark kitchen. 5 in the morning, no lights on, watching a camera feed on my phone, waiting for a man I trusted with a key to my house to show up and use it against me again. There was nothing heroic about it. I was just a tired 51-year-old sitting in the silence of a house I suddenly felt like a stranger in, trying to do the right thing methodically instead of reactively. That discipline, the choice to wait, to gather, to think before acting, is something I didn't always have. Younger version of me would have changed those locks the same night Dennis texted and called it done. Problem solved. Move on. But that version of me also would have let Calvin walk away clean, free to find the next house belonging to someone who traveled too much and trusted too easily. The patience I exercised wasn't passivity. It was a decision to see the full picture before I closed the frame. What Calvin did was a calculated betrayal. He saw a man who mentioned being on the road, handed him a key out of necessity, and made a copy before giving it back. He looked at my absence and saw inventory. He looked at my garage and saw a venue. He didn't stumble into an opportunity. He built a business on one, quietly, for 8 months, betting that I was too disconnected from my own home to notice, and for a while he was right. That part is uncomfortable to admit. I was paying bills for a property I wasn't watching. The signs were there in the utility numbers every month, and I didn't look at them closely enough. There's a cost to that kind of inattention. Not a moral failing exactly, more a practical one. The assumption that because nothing bad had happened before, nothing bad was happening now. I'd gotten comfortable with being absent, and comfort, when it tips into complacency, has a way of creating exactly the opening that someone like Calvin was looking for. What I'm grateful for is that I didn't let that recognition turn into paralysis or bitterness. I found out. I got still. I thought it through. I called the police, installed the cameras, went back to work, and came home on a Friday night with a plan rather than just anger. That sequence mattered. The outcome, the charges, the settlement, the full documentation of what he'd done depended entirely on that sequence being executed with a clear head. Dennis played his part too. He noticed, and more importantly, he said something. That one text message was the hinge point of the whole thing. I think about the version of events where he assumed it wasn't his business, where he figured I had to know what was going on at my own property. I'd probably still be paying Calvin's electric bill right now. My daughter asked me afterward if I was angry. I told her I had been, briefly, and then it became something more useful, a kind of determined clarity about what I needed to do and in what order. Anger burns fast and doesn't build anything. What I needed wasn't heat. I needed to be steady. And I was. I still give out keys when I have to. Plumbers, HVAC techs, the occasional contractor. But I give them differently now. I write down the name, the date, and the reason. I change the code on the smart lock when the job is done. I check the camera feed every morning like I check the weather. None of it is paranoia. It's just paying attention, the minimum a person owes to the things they've worked for. Calvin made a choice based on who he thought I was. Turned out I was someone different.